Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. Join Amina and Kofi in a thrilling African folktale that will grip your heart and ignite your imagination. As they journey through ancient caverns, haunted by dark visions and spirits, they must confront the terrifying power of the abyss, an ancient force of darkness that seeks to consume their souls. In a story filled with twists, sacrifices, and a battle between light and darkness, will Amina and Kofi survive the trials of the abyss? Witness the ultimate sacrifice in a tale that explores courage, love, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. This epic story will leave you on the edge of your seat. In the heart of a village named Nyama, nestled deep in the African savanna, there was a thick forest known as the Whispering Woods. The villagers believed it was a place where spirits roamed freely, and it was said that those who ventured too deep would never return. The trees in the forest seemed to sway on their own, and strange whispers could be heard by those brave enough to enter. But no one knew where the whispers came from, and no one dared to find out. One day, a young boy named Kofi, curious and fearless, decided to explore the edge of the forest. Kofi was known for his adventurous spirit, and despite warnings from the elders, he couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. As he walked closer to the forest, he could hear the faint whispers calling his name, Kofi. Kofi. The sound sent chills down his spine, but his curiosity pushed him forward. Kofi took a deep breath and stepped into the forest. The air was thick, and the trees seemed to close in around him. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the trees, Kofi. Kofi. He felt as if 1,000 eyes were watching him, but he couldn't see anyone. As he moved deeper into the forest, the whispers became more distinct, and he could almost make out words, but they were in a language he didn't understand. Suddenly, the ground beneath Kofi began to shake. The trees swayed violently, and the whispers turned into screams. Kofi tried to run, but his feet were rooted to the ground. The screams grew louder and louder until, with a deafening roar, the ground split open, and Kofi fell into darkness. Kofi landed in a dark, cold place. The air was damp, and the only sound was his own breathing. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel something moving around him. Panic set in as he realized he was not alone. He tried to get up, but something grabbed his leg and pulled him further into the darkness. As he was dragged deeper, Kofi saw faint, glowing eyes staring at him from the shadows. "Who are you?" Kofi asked, his voice trembling. There was no answer, just the sound of heavy breathing all around him. The eyes moved closer, and Kofi could see the outline of a creature, tall and thin, with long, sharp claws. The creature leaned down, its eyes glowing brighter. "You should not have come here," it whispered, its voice cold and menacing. "This is a place for the lost, a place where the spirits dwell. Now you belong to us." Kofi tried to scream, but no sound came out. The creature's claws tightened around his leg, and he was pulled further into the darkness. The last thing Kofi saw before everything went black was the creature's sharp teeth, gleaming in the dim light. Back in the village, Kofi's mother, Amina, sensed that something was wrong. She had a deep connection with her son, and she knew in her heart that he was in danger. She ran to the elders, begging them to help her find Kofi, but the elders shook their heads. "The Whispering Woods have taken him," one of the elders said solemnly. "There is nothing we can do." But Amina refused to give up. She vowed to enter the forest herself and bring her son back, no matter the cost. Little did she know, the forest held secrets far darker and more dangerous than she could ever imagine. Amina was determined to save her son. Ignoring the warnings of the elders, she gathered what little she had, a small knife, a piece of bread, and a cloth wrapped around her shoulders, then set out towards the whispering woods. As she approached the edge of the forest, she could feel the weight of the trees pressing down on her. The whispers began almost immediately, soft and distant at first, but growing louder with each step. Amina! Amina! The voices called, just as they had called Kofi. But Amina was not afraid. She was a mother on a mission, and nothing could stop her. The forest was darker than she had imagined, with twisted branches blocking out the sun. The ground was uneven, then roots seemed to reach out to trip her. But Amina pressed on, calling out her son's name, Kofi. Kofi, where are you? There was no answer, only the whispering voices. They seemed to be all around her, echoing off the trees, taunting her with their chilling tone. Turn back, Amina, they whispered. You do not belong here. But Amina ignored them. She knew her son was somewhere in this cursed forest, and she would not live without him. She walked deeper and deeper into the woods, her heart pounding in her chest. The deeper she went, the louder the whispers became, until they were no longer whispers but loud, angry voices shouting in her ears. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, just as it had when Kofi entered the forest. The trees swayed violently, and Amina stumbled, nearly falling to the ground. The air grew cold, and a thick fog began to rise from the ground. Out of the fog, a figure emerged, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes and sharp claws. Amina's heart raced as the figure approached her. Who are you? She demanded, holding her knife out in front of her. The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised one long, clawed finger and pointed at her. You should not have come here, it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. Amina took a step back, but she did not lower her knife. Where is my son? She demanded. The figure's eyes glowed brighter. He is lost, just like all who enter this place. You will be lost too, if you do not leave now. But Amina did not move. She was not going to leave without Kofi. I will find him, she said, her voice steady. And I will bring him home. The figure let out a low, menacing laugh. You think you can defy the spirits of this forest? Foolish woman. You will never see your son again. With that, the figure lunged at Amina, its claws outstretched. Amina dodged to the side, slashing at the figure with her knife. The blade passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke, and the figure let out an ear-piercing scream. Amina covered her ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was too loud. The scream seemed to pierce through her very soul, and she fell to her knees, gasping for breath. The figure loomed over her, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. You cannot defeat us, it whispered, its voice soft and cold. You belong to us now. Amina struggled to her feet, refusing to give up. No, she said through gritted teeth. I belong to no one. She turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers followed her, growing louder and more frantic. The trees seemed to reach out to grab her, but she dodged and weaved, never slowing down. She didn't stop until she was out of the forest, back in the safety of the village. But as she looked back at the whispering woods, she knew this was only the beginning. The forest had taken her son, and she would do whatever it took to get him back, even if it meant facing the darkest forces in the world. Amina returned to the village, her heart heavy with fear and determination. She knew that if she was to save her son, she needed help. The elders had always spoken of the dangers of the whispering woods, but they had never told the full story. Amina suspected they knew more than they let on, and she was determined to find out the truth. She went to the hut of the oldest elder, Elder Kwame, a man who had lived in Nyama for more than a century. His face was wrinkled with age, and his eyes were clouded with the weight of years, but he was still sharp, and his knowledge of the village's history was unmatched. "Elder Kwame," Amina said as she entered his hut. "I need your help." Elder Kwame looked up from his seat by the fire, his eyes narrowing as he saw the desperation in Amina's face. "I warned you not to enter the Whispering Woods," he said, his voice stern. "Now you have angered the spirits." "I had no choice," Amina replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "The forest has taken my son, Kofi. I need to know how to get him back." Elder Kwame sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "The Whispering Woods are cursed," he said slowly. "Long ago, before our village was even founded, the forest was home to powerful spirits. They were guardians of the land, but they were also fierce and unforgiving. The people of this land angered the spirits, and they were cursed. The forest became a place of darkness, where the spirits roam freely, trapping those who enter." Amina listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. "But there must be a way to save him," she insisted. "Please, Elder Kwame, tell me what I must do." The elder hesitated, his old eyes searching Amina's face. "There is a way." Elder Kwame's hesitation sent a shiver down Amina's spine. His eyes, once vibrant with wisdom, now appeared clouded with fear. "There is a way," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, "but it comes at a great cost." Amina leaned in closer, desperation etched on her face. "I will do anything," she said firmly. "I must save my son." The elder sighed deeply, his bony hands trembling as he reached for a small, worn-out book on a nearby shelf. The book's cover was made of cracked leather, and it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "This book," Elder Kwame explained, "contains ancient rituals forgotten by most. Among them is a ritual that may allow you to enter the realm where the spirits have taken your son. But be warned, this ritual is not for the faint of heart. It requires a sacrifice." Amina felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of sacrifice?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "The sacrifice of blood," Elder Kwame said, his voice trembling. "Your blood, Amina. You must spill your own blood to open the gateway to the spirit realm. But that is not all. Once the gateway is open, you will face the spirits in their true form, and they are far more dangerous than anything in our world. They will try to consume your soul, to trap you in their realm forever. If you fail, you will never return." Amina's heart pounded in her chest. The thought of facing such darkness terrified her, but the image of Kofi, lost and alone in that dark place, gave her strength. "I will do it," she said, her voice steady. "Tell me what I must do." Elder Kwame nodded solemnly and began to explain the ritual. "You must go to the heart of the Whispering Woods, to a place where the trees grow so thick that no light can penetrate. There, you will find an ancient altar, covered in moss and surrounded by bones. This is where you must perform the ritual. You must draw a circle around the altar with your blood, and speak the words of the incantation from this book. Once the circle is complete, the gateway will open." He handed the book to Amina, who took it with trembling hands. The book felt unnaturally cold, and the pages were brittle, as if they had not been touched in centuries. The words inside were written in an ancient language, but as Amina looked at them, they seemed to shift and change, forming words she could understand. "Remember," Elder Kwame warned, "once you enter the spirit realm, you cannot trust anything you see. The spirits are masters of deception, and they will try to trick you. You must stay focused on your goal, and never forget why you are there. If you lose your way, you will be lost forever." Amina nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to turn back now. "Thank you, Elder Kwame," she said, standing up. "I will not fail." As Amina left the elder's hut, the weight of what she was about to do settled heavily on her shoulders. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the village, but Amina did not stop to rest. She walked straight towards the whispering woods, clutching the book tightly to her chest. The whispers began as soon as she entered the forest, but this time, they were different. They were not just voices in the wind, but seemed to come from all around her, as if the forest itself was alive. Amina. Amina. The voices called, their tone both mocking and sinister. But Amina ignored them. She walked deeper into the forest, following Elder Kwame's instructions. The trees grew thicker and the air colder, until she could barely see her hand in front of her face. But Amina did not stop. She could feel the presence of the spirits all around her, watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. But she would not give them the satisfaction. Finally, she reached the heart of the forest. The trees were so thick here that no light could penetrate, and the air was heavy with the smell of decay. In the center of the clearing was the ancient altar, just as Elder Kwame had described. It was covered in moss and surrounded by bones, the remnants of those who had come before her. Amina took a deep breath and knelt before the altar. She drew her knife and, with trembling hands, made a deep cut across her palm. Blood flowed freely, and she used it to draw a circle around the altar, just as Elder Kwame had instructed. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the forest itself was trying to stop her. But Amina did not falter. She opened the book and began to recite the incantation. The words felt foreign on her tongue, but as she spoke them, she could feel a strange power building within her. The air around her grew colder, and the ground began to tremble. Suddenly, the circle she had drawn began to glow with a faint, eerie light. The glow grew brighter and brighter until it was blinding, and Amina had to shield her eyes. When she looked up again, the air in front of her was shimmering, as if the fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. The gateway had opened. As Amina stepped through the glowing portal, she felt a sudden rush of cold air that nearly took her breath away. The world around her twisted and blurred, and she felt as if she was falling through a void. The whispers from the forest grew louder, now mingled with distant screams and eerie laughter. It was as if every shadow in the forest had come alive, reaching out to her, trying to pull her back. But Amina kept moving forward, determined to save her son. When the world finally stopped spinning, she found herself standing in a place that was both familiar and alien. It looked like the whispering woods, but everything was different. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The ground was covered in a thick, black mist that swirled around her feet, and the sky was a deep, unnatural red. "This is the shadow realm," Amina whispered to herself, feeling a deep sense of dread settle in her heart. The place was filled with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into her very bones. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and she could hear the distant cries of lost souls echoing through the trees. Amina took a deep breath and stilled herself. She knew she had to stay focused. The spirits would try to deceive her, to lure her off the path, but she could not let them. She had to find Kofi and bring him back, no matter the cost. As she walked deeper into the shadow realm, the twisted trees seemed to close in around her, their branches scraping against her skin like claws. The whispers grew louder, turning into a cacophony of voices that filled her head with doubt and fear. "You will never find him," they taunted. "He is lost, and so are you." Amina clenched her fists and kept moving forward. She could feel the spirits watching her, their eyes burning into her back. But she would not be swayed. She knew that Kofi was out there somewhere, and she would not leave without him. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet began to shift. The mist thickened, swirling around her like a living thing, and the trees seemed to melt away, leaving her standing in a vast, empty wasteland. The sky above was dark and stormy, and the air was filled with the sound of distant thunder. Amina felt a surge of panic rise within her. She was lost, and the spirits were playing with her, trying to break her will. But she could not give up. She had to keep moving, to keep searching for her son. As she walked through the desolate landscape, she saw shadows moving in the distance. At first, she thought they were just tricks of the light, but as she got closer, she realized they were figures, tall and thin, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. They moved slowly, their bodies shifting and warping as they walked, and Amina could feel their malevolent gaze upon her. "You should not be here," one of the figures hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "This is not your world." "I am here for my son," Amina replied, her voice shaking but determined. "Where is he?" The figure let out a low, menacing laugh. "Your son is lost, just like all who enter this realm. You will never see him again." Amina's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to give in to fear. "I will find him," she said, her voice firm. "I will bring him back." The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and it began to move closer, its body twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. "You cannot defeat us," it whispered, its voice filled with malice. "You are nothing but a mortal, the fragile, weak creature. We are eternal, and we will consume you." Amina felt a surge of terror as the figure reached out towards her, its long, skeletal fingers inches from her face. But just as it was about to touch her, a bright light erupted. The light that erupted before Amina's eyes was blinding, a searing flash that seemed to rip through the darkness like a knife. The malevolent figure shrieked, recoiling from the brightness, its twisted form writhing as if in agony. Amina shielded her eyes with one hand, the other gripping the ancient book, now trembling with a life of its own. As the light began to fade, Amina lowered her hand, her vision adjusting to the dim glow that now surrounded her. She found herself standing in a circle of light, a protective barrier that had formed around her, keeping the shadowy figures at bay. They lingered at the edge of the circle, their glowing eyes filled with hate, but they dared not cross the threshold. Amina looked down at the book in her hands, realizing that it was the source of the light. The ancient symbols on its cover pulsed with a faint glow, and as she watched, they began to shift and change, forming new patterns and words that she could barely comprehend. It was as if the book was trying to communicate with her, guiding her through the perilous realm she had entered. "You are not alone," a voice whispered in her mind, soft but insistent. Amina's heart skipped a beat. It was not the voice of the spirits, but something else, something ancient and powerful that resonated deep within her soul. "You carry the blood of your ancestors, those who have walked this path before you. They are with you, Amina. Do not be afraid." Amina clutched the book tighter, feeling a surge of strength and determination. She would not be swayed by the spirits or their twisted games. She had a mission, and she would see it through, no matter the cost. The shadowy figures continued to hover at the edge of the circle, hissing and snarling, but they did not dare approach. Amina took a deep breath and stepped forward, and to her surprise, the circle of light moved with her, pushing the shadows back. It was as if the book was protecting her, creating a safe path through the darkness. With renewed determination, Amina pressed on, moving deeper into the shadow realm. The landscape around her continued to shift and change, the ground cracking and crumbling beneath her feet, the sky above swirling with unnatural colors. But the light from the book held the darkness at bay, guiding her through the twisted terrain. As she walked, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were not the taunting voices of the spirits, but something else, something deeper and more primal. "Amina! Amina!" The voices called, echoing through the void. They were voices of the lost, the souls who had been trapped in the shadow realm for eternity. Amina felt a pang of sorrow for them, but she knew she could not help them. Her focus had to remain on finding Kofi. But then, something changed. The whispers began to merge, forming a single voice, the voice that was hauntingly familiar. Amina froze, her heart racing as the voice spoke her name again, this time louder, clearer. "Amina." It was Kofi. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She spun around, searching the shadows for any sign of her son. The light from the book flared, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground, but there was no sign of him. yet the voice was unmistakable. It was Kofi, calling out to her, his voice filled with fear and desperation. "Kofi!" Amina cried out, her voice trembling. "Kofi, where are you?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, out of the darkness, the figure began to emerge. Amina's heart pounded in her chest as she watched, the light from the book flickering uncertainly as the figure came closer. It was a small figure, hunched over, moving slowly, as if weighed down by some invisible force. As the figure stepped into the circle of light, Amina's breath caught in her throat. It was Kofi, but not as she remembered him. His once bright eyes were now dull and lifeless, his skin pale and cold. His clothes were tattered, and his body was covered in strange, dark markings that seemed to writhe and twist as she looked at them. "Kofi!" Amina whispered, tears streaming down her face. She reached out to him, but as her hand touched his, she felt a cold, sharp pain shoot through her body. She gasped, pulling her hand back, and watched in horror as the markings on Kofi's skin began to spread, reaching out towards her like tendrils of darkness. "Amina!" Kofi's voice was a hollow echo, his eyes staring blankly ahead. "You should not have come." Amina's heart broke as she realized the truth. This was not her son, not anymore. The spirits had taken him, twisted him, turned him into something else, something dark and corrupted. She had come to save him, but now she realized that she might be too late. But Amina refused to give up. She had come too far, sacrificed too much. She would not live without her son. Clenching her fists, she looked into Kofi's lifeless eyes and made a vow. "I will save you, Kofi," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I will not let them take you. I will bring you back, no matter what it takes." The light from the book flared once more, brighter than before, and the darkness around her recoiled. But Amina knew that the battle had only just begun. The spirits would not let her go so easily, and she would have to fight with everything she had to save her son. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the twisted trees groaning and creaking as if they were alive, watching Amina with unseen eyes. The figure that was once Kofi stood motionless, his body swaying slightly as the dark tendrils continued to writhe across his skin. Amina's heart ached with sorrow and fear, but she could not afford to falter now. She had to find a way to save him, to break the hold that the spirits had on him. But how? The light from the book was growing weaker, the glow flickering as if struggling to maintain its strength. Amina knew that time was running out. She needed to act quickly, but she had no idea where to start. The spirits were powerful, far more powerful than she had anticipated, and they were determined to keep her son. As she stood there, her mind racing, a soft sound began to fill the air. It was faint at first, barely audible over the whispers and groans of the shadow realm, but it grew louder, more distinct. It was a melody, haunting and beautiful, yet filled with a deep, aching sorrow. Amina felt a chill run down her spine as the melody washed over her, filling her with a sense of dread and longing. The sound seemed to come from all around her, echoing through the twisted landscape. Amina turned, trying to locate the source, but it was impossible. The melody seemed to be everywhere, weaving through the shadows like a living thing. It was a song of despair, of loss, and it resonated deep within her soul. Kofi began to move, his head turning slowly towards the direction of the melody. His eyes, once lifeless, now glowed with a strange light, and he began to walk towards the source of the sound. Amina felt a surge of panic as she realized that the melody was drawing him deeper into the shadow realm, pulling him farther away from her. "No!" Amina cried out, rushing forward to grab her son's hand. But as she touched him, the dark tendrils that covered his body lashed out, wrapping around her wrist like chains. Amina gasped as a searing pain shot through her arm, the tendrils tightening their grip, pulling her towards the shadows. Desperate, Amina reached for the book with her free hand, but the tendrils seemed to sense her intent. They tightened their hold, dragging her to her knees as the darkness closed in around her. The melody grew louder, more insistent, and Amina felt her strength ebbing away, the coldness of the tendrils seeping into her very soul. But she could not give up. Not now. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, Amina pulled the book close to her chest, the light within it flaring weakly. She began to recite the incantation, her voice trembling but determined. The words were ancient, filled with power, and as she spoke them, she felt a surge of energy flow through her. The tendrils hissed, recoiling slightly, but they did not release their grip. Amina gritted her teeth, fighting through the pain as she continued to chant, the light from the book growing brighter with each word. The melody faltered, the notes becoming dissonant, as if the very fabric of the shadow realm was being torn apart. But the spirits were not done yet. The ground beneath Amina began to tremble, the shadows swirling around her like a storm. The tendrils tightened, pulling her deeper into the darkness, but Amina refused to let go. She could feel the power of the spirits pressing down on her, trying to crush her, but she fought back with everything she had. Then, just as it seemed like the darkness would consume her, Amina felt a sudden jolt, a violent pull that wrenched her away from the grasp of the tendrils. She tumbled to the ground, gasping for breath, as the dark vines recoiled, hissing and thrashing as if they had been burned. The book in her hands flared brightly, its light searing through the shadows, and for a brief moment, the darkness retreated. Amina staggered to her feet, clutching the book to her chest, her heart pounding in her ears. The haunting melody still echoed through the air, but it was no longer the sweet, sorrowful tune that had lured Kofi. Now it was a discordant cacophony, a twisted parody of its former self, filled with malice and rage. The spirits were furious, and they would not be thwarted so easily. Kofi stood a few feet away, his body still covered in the dark markings, but his eyes were once again dull and lifeless. He swayed slightly, as if in a trance, then Amina knew that whatever had a hold on him was not going to let go without a fight. She took a step toward him, but the ground beneath her feet suddenly cracked, a deep fissure opening up between them. Amina stumbled back, barely managing to keep her balance as the earth split apart, a chasm of darkness yawning wide before her. From the depths of the fissure, a cold, foul wind began to rise, carrying with it the stench of decay and the whispers of the damned. Amina looked down into the abyss and saw the faces of the lost souls trapped within the shadow realm, their eyes filled with despair and torment. They reached out to her with skeletal hands, their mouths open in silent screams, begging for release. But there was no saving them, they were too far gone, their souls corrupted beyond redemption. Suddenly, a new figure emerged from the darkness, rising slowly from the chasm like a specter. It was tall and thin, its body draped in tattered black robes that fluttered in the foul wind. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but Amina could feel its gaze upon her, cold and piercing. This was no ordinary spirit, this was one of the Shadow Realm's true masters, a being of immense power and malevolence. Amina's breath caught in her throat as the figure raised one skeletal hand, pointing directly at her. The shadows around it swirled and coiled like living things, responding to its will, and the ground trembled beneath her feet. "You dare defy us?" The figure's voice was a low, rasping whisper that seemed to echo from the very depths of the abyss. "You, a mere mortal, think you can challenge the will of the Shadow Realm?" Amina felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to stand tall, her grip on the book tightening. "I will not let you take my son," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I will fight you with everything I have." The figure laughed, a sound like the rustling of dead leaves, and the shadows around it began to writhe and twist, forming into shapes that were half seen in the gloom, grotesque, nightmarish creatures with glowing eyes and jagged teeth. They slithered and crawled towards Amina, their movements unnaturally fast, their snarls and growls filling the air. Amina's heart raced as she realized she was surrounded. The protective light from the book was dimming, flickering as the darkness pressed in on all sides. She could feel the cold, clammy breath of the creatures on her skin, their foul stench making her gag. But she refused to give in to fear. She had come too far to turn back now. With a surge of determination, Amina opened the book and began to chant once more, her voice rising above the growls and hisses of the approaching creatures. The ancient words resonated in the air, filled with power and defiance. The light from the book flared brightly, pushing back the darkness, and the creatures hesitated, their snarls turning to whimpers as they recoiled from the light. But the hooded figure remained unmoved, its hand still outstretched, as if commanding the darkness itself. The fissure in the ground widened, and the cold wind intensified, howling like a chorus of lost souls. Amina could feel the pull of the abyss, a force that sought to drag her down into the depths, to consume her soul and make her one of the damned. But she would not be taken. Not like this. With a final, desperate cry, Amina reached deep within herself, calling on the strength of her ancestors, the warriors and shamans who had fought against the darkness long before her. The book in her hands blazed with a light so intense that it burned away the shadows, the creatures shrieking as they were consumed by the light. The hooded figure snarled, its hand snapping back as if burned. The fissure in the ground began to close, the darkness receding as the light pushed it back. Amina could feel the power of the shadow realm weakening, its grip on her son loosening. She had won, at least for now. But as the last of the shadows faded, Amina knew that this was only the beginning. The shadow realm would not give up so easily, and she would need to be stronger than ever to save her son. The hooded figure had retreated, but its malevolent presence lingered, a reminder that the true battle was yet to come. Have the shadow realm given up so easily, or the true battle is yet to come for Amina and Kofi? Join us on the next episode to find out.